Good morning and Shabbat Shalom. Welcome to Congregation Beth. I'd like to introduce our panel for Hot Topic Shabbat. I want to remind all of us who are tuning in that what we would normally do under the old ways is that, and I'm sorry to say this for our guests, but normally what we do is we have a breakfast. And we go from 9:15 to 9:45 to 10 o'clock with Jewish soul food, which means bagels, cream cheese, and lox, as well as fruit salad and cakes and whatever. You must feed Jews in order for them to talk Torah. So we do that, and then we have a service, abbreviated service, and then we have a Hot Topic Shabbat. So right now, we're going to have to skip those things. And since we have pandemic rules into effect for the last year, and we're going to do that. So we're going to just go right to our program. But I'd want to give us a little bit of meditation in a second to get off to a sanctified start and a blessing to begin. Since we will be discussing the Torah portion of the week first, and then we will get into the discussion with our esteemed guests. Yes. So I want to welcome everyone. Those who are signed up on the Zoom, we welcome you. Those who are tuned in live stream, we welcome you. I'm hoping that if those of us who would like to write questions or comments, our media tech gentleman is Garrett Kais. And for our Jewish friends to remember, Kais rhymes with the Hebrew word chai, which means life. Garrett Kais. And he's going to be in charge of, as always, the technological. We really appreciate having him as a new member of the Temple family of holy vessels. We start this moment with a prayer to engage in the study of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, eternal God, who is the source of the universe and who sanctifies us through commandments, sacred acts, to engage in the study of Torah. And because of the fact that we don't have a service as we would normally do, and also because this is one of the most controversial issues that we could take on. And the third reason is that we have distinguished clergy here who are going to do this, and it's not easy. It is walking a fine line to be true to your convictions as you understand, as they understand their calling as people of the clergy. And at the same time, just showing how clergy, this is part of my interest in this, how clergy deal with the most controversial, different than politicians and elected officials, I should say, or other folks, because we're really out in the streets with people, serving people daily. So I want to note that this is going to be a challenging thing. And I want to get us off to a meditative start, and that will be hopefully for the audience, the congregation that participates, a little bit more of a serene approach. So when we agree or disagree, we remember the context that it is Shabbat. It is Shabbat. It is a day of rest. It is a day of love. It's a day of adoration to God for creating the world when God rested. And this is our day of rest as well as God's day of rest. May the words of our mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable to you, God, on this holy day of Shabbat. And let us say Amen. Now I can see those who are on Zoom. Welcome all of you. And I can introduce to you our clergy. We have people here from as far away as, is that Jill Staubitz? Are you still in Connecticut? We have people from Connecticut here. We even have people from as far as Cypress Ridge on 170. I mean, we have a lot of people from far out, and they are far out. So we got all kinds of people here, on island, off island. Oh, you know what? I forgot to tell you, we have somebody here who I'm looking at who is a dear friend. He's a genius. He lives in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And he's here today. Hey, George, nice to see you. And thank you for being here. We're all going to stay on mute unless I want to speak. So we're going to have a chance, but I think we need to get the discussion going first, and then I'll give you the, and if you have, if you want to send questions, why don't you do that? And Garrett, you can see what I see, and you can bring questions to me so that we can give people a chance. But the first part of this is going to be a conversation. I want to introduce. I'm trying to figure out exactly what deacons do. And I've talked to different people. He's going to have to explain this. What is a deacon? What do they do? They're clergy. I have a gentleman by the name of Mike Smigelski, who is a delightful human being. Lives 2 doors down from me. He's a deacon at St. Gregory's. And I'm going to be asking him more about this. But today we have a deacon, John Crapanzola, who is on the clergy staff at St. Gregory's. He is a deacon. He is. I met him at an event where we commemorated the clergy that gave their lives on the USS Dorchester in World War II. Rabbi, Catholic priest, 2 Protestant clergy. I listened to him, and they said he is a former 30 years. Retired veteran detective from the New York Police Department. Well, you know how my brain goes when I'm thinking about this program. I said, I want that gentleman. I'm going to find a way to get him this way in this program because he's perfect. I want to welcome him. It's a new relationship with Deacon John, and we're glad to have him. He's also a police, I believe he's a police chaplain like myself, but you're chaplain for the Bluffton Police Department. Can you think of a better police chaplain after having been a detective for NYPD? Excuse me. Deacon John, we're happy to have you. Thank you for giving us your time this morning. Thank you. And then we have, I can't read what okay, we're getting notes. And you got to remember, Garrett's constantly giving us messages, whether it's technology or whatever. So if I'm distracted, it's all for the good. Then we have Sister Therese Lee. Reverend Therese Lee. She grew up a Catholic, so it's okay. I'm 50% right. I'm sorry. It was Michael Shapiro. Sorry,
My
Michael.
mother is smiling.
Your mother is smiling. Reverend Therese Lee is the Reverend of the Unity Church. And I think, Reverend, maybe you can, when it comes to your time to talk, whatever the issue is, give us just a brief for those who have no clue what Unity Church is.
Sure.
Just give us a quick, where does it belong in the spectrum of religion and Christianity in American society? Just really brief summary.
All right.
And now, let me get to the right title to the right person. Sister Pam Smith. She is a new friend, and we have formed I think a group here between about 5 of us, clergy, John Black and Sister Pam Smith and Reverend Therese Lee and Bishop Brian Dixon, Mormon Church, and we are a cadre of 5 that are doing some very interesting things, and I'm welcoming these 3 individuals who represent themselves as well as always their faith traditions. We want to start by looking at the Torah portion of the week. Now, my congregants have all received my recent column in the newspaper that spoke about today's Torah portion. How nice. And Moses and the golden calf story. Needless to say, I have received mixed reviews from the community. I don't really see, I think the people who have appreciated and expressed their political views by saying right on, Rabbi, that the mob that created a golden calf and went completely out of control, and then the associate director of all of this brother of Moses, Mr. Aaron created a golden calf, and did not end well in that situation because half the crowd that decided to stick with the insurrectionists in the Torah ended up being killed. The other half stayed loyal to Moses and to God, ultimately led to a reconciliation. So that did not end well, but it did lead to that kind of reconciliation with those who stood loyal. So when I saw what the events were, and I was looking for hot topics, it just seemed natural that what we saw in Washington was not so dissimilar in terms of the religious ideology and so forth expressed while those insurrectionists were invoking God and religious symbolism of their faith traditions to justify their cause and their march and their ultimate acts of violence. I have received some comments basically saying the theme of the comments I've received from the community, from friends and those I don't know who have criticized my comments, have basically said, I'm not going to disagree, but you're being disingenuous in what you wrote because you didn't talk about Black Lives Matter and Antifa, and that they are just as evil and bad as these people. So, when you pick on one, you should be fair-minded to the other. Fair-minded meaning to condemn the other as just as evil with their mobs that, for example, took over a federal courthouse building in, was it Portland? So, you can see this is a sensitive topic. And when you look at what the Israelites did, and remember this is where we always start with Torah first, and then we're going to open it up to our colleagues. When you look at what that whole story is about, when the Israelites were impatient, fearful, and I think that's going to be a key word here, fearful, because Moses was up on the mountain trying to figure out what to do with his 10 Commandments and communing with God. Their fear led them to an extreme act. And that God was the golden calf that they built, a golden statue. And you know the story that they say, this is your God, O Israel, the one who brought us out of Egypt. So they were literally saying, not God, but the golden calf is the God that brought us out of Egypt. They were regressing back to their idolatry in Egypt. And so, the disappointment and the betrayal that they felt, that Moses felt when he saw this, and he's told to go down, the people in the camp are in a rumble, and he saw this out of control group, and they're dancing, they're drinking, the Torah says. They're really in a state of moral debauchery, and Moses breaks the tablets, And Aaron says, the people made me do it. And the funny thing that I'll say to our Jewish, my congregants, as well as anybody else who studies the Bible, but those of us who study rabbinic literature and Midrash and Talmud will note, this is what makes our Christian friends shake their head at me when they hear these stories. The rabbinic literature is very sensitive to the fact that Aaron was the creator of the golden calf, and they try to reconcile this. So what do? You can find many sources in rabbinic literature that show that Aaron, based on rabbinic thinking, as apologists for him, try to portray him not as the perpetrator, but as the hero of the story. How could that be? And so what they try to show in their own way by quoting verses and their own creative stories is that Aaron is the guy who took on the sin of doing this so that the people wouldn't have to bear that responsibility. You can say, nice try, rabbis, but or you can say, what a guy. He was a hero. He was a martyr. He martyred himself. He compromised himself at every level and betrayed everything that was sacred to him so that the people wouldn't actually be the ones that made it, only he. So maybe that makes sense in a way. Others would say, nice try. But I just want to give us a textual base, which is what we always do before we start the discussion, because we have to start out of a context of sacred study before we get into the sacred discussion. So this Torah portion is chock full of moral questions and controversy. And last night you heard if you listened to the service, you heard my sermon about what America needs us to do, and that we have to look at in the awakening from below, not the awakening, as the mystics say, from above, the awakening from below, the holy acts that we all engage in, not the miracles of splitting the sea, but the acts that we engage in to figure out a pathway out of this mess we are in. The fact that the police warned the Senate and the House that on Thursday there were credible reports of another incursion against the legislative leaders so that they would cancel their work. I mean, who's heard of that in America? Where is the police? Where are the people? How does this all happen? I'm sure Deacon John will give us his view, and from not just a moral perspective, but one of the things that he can do so beautifully is to give us a tactical view that we might not have heard before. So I'm going to start this discussion, and I want to start with this, and I'm going to just ask you all each one of you to raise your hands just so we can call on you. Whoever wants to take on a question, not everyone has to answer every question, but whatever one suits you. They've all seen these questions, and they've had a chance to reflect. So for the sake of time, you'll decide, and we'll keep our answers concise, the best that we can, with the exception of me. Okay, so we're going to ask the first question is this. Do religious leaders... Sister Pam, did I introduce you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Good.
Yes.
Do religious leaders have a role in the public square, besides the pulpit, let alone on the pulpit of their respective congregations, to speak out on the threat of this kind of militancy, which we witnessed on January 6th? What about when we see in the future that other groups representing this kind of potential violence, like Black Lives Matter or Antifa, as those who have written me have shared with me, or some other groups on the opposite side of the political spectrum? Is it our job to be fair, balanced, and Or should we be just speaking our minds, saying what we see is how we feel and how we interpret our scriptures? What's your sense of this? How about a hand up, and one of you go first. Sister Pam.
Okay, Rabbi, it's kind of several questions put together, but it seems to me that when I look at the Catholic tradition, which is biblical and also a weight of tradition, we have a body of teaching called Catholic social teaching, which is sometimes called the best kept secret of Catholicism. But it addresses things like freedom, civil rights. It addresses warfare and what constitutes a just war. It addresses racial justice, life issues, whether it's abortion, euthanasia, or capital punishment. So there's a vast body, economic justice, vast body of tradition. And a lot of times I think what happens is the people in the pews are barely aware of that. People who have done seminary study, people who read Catholic publications, study materials online, etc., may be very attuned to that, but sometimes the person in the pew is not. And I think that it's very clear that there's an obligation, not just for those who preach, but for those who teach in Catholic institutions and Catholic settings and have media available to them, to talk about issues that are before us, to talk about political issues, to talk about justice issues, and so on. Now, on another part of your question, Catholic social teaching is very clear that our preference is for working through the legal system that exists, engaging in civil disobedience if something is morally wrong, and protesting injustices, but using nonviolent means, using means that are available through government forms, courts, etc. And then when we do have demonstrations, to engage in peaceful demonstrations. It's called civil disobedience. Civil because it's societal, but also because the behavior should exhibit civility. So those are the kinds of things that we see. I've been to a number of demonstrations myself, having to do with racial justice, having to do with war, having to do with pro-life and the unborn. And all of the ones I've been involved in have been peaceful demonstrations, respectful demonstrations. We do condemn demonstrations when they become violent, because the only way that we can really express in the public square is if we are respectful, even to those with whom we disagree. I hope that's sufficient. Yeah.
Please.
I'm Reverend Therese Lee from Unity Spiritual Center, and just to tell you what Unity is, we are considered in the World Parliament of Religions a new thought genre, and so we focus on how Jesus lived his life. So this topic today is close to my heart. How are we the feet of Jesus out there in the world? Is Jesus the only way shower? No, not in my view, not in our view. What I want to address is, and we look at the Bible metaphysically. What's underneath it? What does it mean? What's the root of the word in Hebrew or in Aramaic? And how does it apply to life today, 2,000 years later? I want to say that I think us all, as clergy, teachers, we have an utmost responsibility, and I think you'll all agree that Sunday morning is the most segregated time of our week. How do we stop the segregation? This is it. Rabbi Bloom having us come in from other faiths to show you what it looks like that we can be male and female and work for God, and also to know that in this system of life, there is racism and there are politics. And I don't think that they often merge together, and I'm going to leave it at that so that Deacon John can weigh in as well.
Ditto.
Woo!
I don't think I could add much more to what Sister and Therese is saying. Only thing I would go a little further and say is that one of the things we have to understand is that, as Sister pointed out, there's a lot of stuff that we do have in our religions, all respective religions. The people at the pews don't get as much because they don't have as much time. And sometimes, just like one of our gospels the other day, it stated, listen to him. I think that's our problem. I think a lot of people come and they hear words, but they don't listen. I think, as you said, possibly we need to get on our pulpits more to present the rights and wrong of what's going on. Mm-hmm. But we do have to walk that line of being non-political. Because as Rabbi said about his article in the paper the other day, he was getting people from both sides of the spectrum, and all he was doing was stating facts. And I think that's what we need to do. We have to make sure that we don't go on one side of the political spectrum or the other. And that's a fine line, and I think that's what we have to do. But we have to walk that line, and we do have to present the views against the right and wrong things. Because all of us here know that peaceful demonstrations and protests have been allowed since the beginning. And we should have able to do that as we want to. But if people cross the line and go against the law, then we need to take action for that.
Let me mention that when you look at the golden calf story, and I'm going to get to you, Deacon John, on leadership in a second, so get ready. You get a religious leader, you know, we're supposed to always be in control of our emotions, right? In public, we are supposed to be the ones who always keep calm and show the public that our public mettle is always in check and ready to go no matter what. Moses gets the 10 Commandments. He's in a state of exaltation. He loses his temper completely and casts them down, breaks them. Unbelievable act. Because of what he sees. His brother has now admitted that he was part of this conspiracy. Even God loses his temper, which I read from the Torah portion in Exodus, by saying, my anger is there, and Moses is trying to dissuade God to from destroying the whole people and starting over with Moses. So you have to ask yourself it's fair to ask about leadership and the Torah and the main characters, which we could have a great discussion on. You can, and I would invite you to talk about leadership. But when you talk about leadership, is this all about, from the Torah as well as January 6th, about failed leadership? And if it is, explain to us how that's so.
Okay. Peaceful demonstration on January 6th. Started out as peaceful demonstration. Agitators got in the way, started to lead people towards Congress. If you notice in some of the videos, you see police officers that were there never took out their weapons. The uniformed police officers, because that's training. They were trained to deal with demonstrations. They also were trained to deal with mobs, looting, rioting. Every bona fide police department has contingency plans. The question I have is, what were they? I didn't see any. Where was their backup? As I said, all of the plans are there. Why weren't they utilized? I think Sister Pam pointed out something the other day. She used the word idealism and pragmatism. Idealism is that ideal we just have a few police officers outside, people will be calm, they'll do their demonstration and go home, which most of the protesters did. But pragmatically, we also have to realize that it could get out of hand. And I believe this didn't start on January 6th. I believe this started after Mr. Floyd got killed. And I would liken this, and I just saw this, and I hope I'm not blaspheming anyone, but I liken Aaron to some of our politicians. What they did is they gave in to the mob. They didn't take a stand. We know in Congress that they've been praising some of the police officers for defending them and so forth and so on, even though it was a great loss of life, and rightly so. But where were these same politicians in Portland, Seattle, Rochester, New York City, so forth and so on, when the police there were not allowed to utilize the weapons that they needed to stop the mobs, not the protest, I've been involved in many protests, both on my sister's side, when I was one of the protesters for pro-life, so forth and so on, but I've also been on the other side, where I was in the middle of crowds, people protesting different things and getting out of hand. We had contingency plans. We were allowed to use force when force is being used against us. But over these last 6 months, 9 months, a year, have you noticed many good, qualified men and women, police chiefs, have lost their jobs, been fired, or had to quit because the local politicians did not allow them to utilize the weapons that they needed to stop what was going on. People were being killed, stores were being burned, people were looting all over the place, and what were the police doing? Standing back. Because they didn't want to work? No, they wanted to do their job, but they were being pulled back. In Washington, my question was, where was their backup? In fact, just the other day, there was a report out. The FBI stated that they notified the Capitol Police that this protest was probably going to turn violent, and to be prepared for that. The Capitol Police responded just a couple hours later. We were never told anything. The leadership is where I believe the failure was. And I'm not talking about the leadership in the law enforcement. I'm talking about the leadership starting at the top with our local politicians. They were more worried about votes than they were worried about protecting the innocent lives of people that were being affected. How many hundreds of police officers were hurt and some killed? How many civilians were hurt and killed? Why? Because they let it get out of hand. So I believe that, I'm going to say it again, what Aaron did, Aaron gave in to the mob. Aaron might have believed what he was doing was wrong, but he let the mob take over. And once we allow mob rule, then this is going to continue. Somewhere along the line, we have to take a stance. And the stance is the rule of law. The laws that we all believe in this country. And when we don't do that, we're going to run into more and more of these type problems. Oh, that answers your question.
Yeah, we're not done with you yet. No.
I think I got to get a few letters too now.
I just want to ask you just to take on one issue as a follow-up before we get to the next question. That is, you talk about police departments. Now, as a newly signed chaplain to the sheriff's office, it's a very different process because there is no city management over the sheriff. He is an elected official. Do you want to make a comment about if we had this happen in some other scenario with sheriff's deputies, would it have been a different situation?
Absolutely not, because the sheriff is an elected position. And like everything else, he runs on a party line. If the people that are in city management or town management or city management are against what the police department is doing or don't want it to work, they're going to let the word out. And they're going to come out against them. Now, that doesn't mean that they're wrong. A lot of times what happens, like anything else, there are certain departments and certain police officers in the United States that go beyond legal means. They need to be stopped. And I don't care if it's at the sheriff's department, the police department, FBI, because we've seen all lines of law enforcement have bad apples. We need to be able to pull them out because the rest of the men and women that are serving, and that's what they're there, they serve the public and willing to give up their lives. These men and women also have to be protected from those police officers who are doing certain things that are illegal. We can't paint a brush and say all of them are bad. Just like we can't say all of them are good. We know there are bad apples. We need to get rid of them. And I've seen, even down my short time here, down in Bluffton, I've seen police officers both on the sheriff's level and on the local level be fired because of inappropriate conduct, and they need to be dealt that way.
I would like to ask a question. So Sister Pam and Reverend Therese, in a nutshell, what was your reaction as to what you saw on January 6th? On a spiritual level, how did it impact you both?
I don't have live TV by choice, and so I got to see it later on. And I, as part of my EQ, which is emotional intelligence that I work on every day, I responded to, oh my, what is happening? So my response, my innate reaction to what was happening on the screen, of course, because I wasn't there, I do know people who were there, was one of, wow, we have a bunch of fearful people. And I'm big on acronyms, and so fear for me there's two different definitions. One is future events appearing real, right? So when we feel like we are not in control, when I also saw not a right relationship with God, because in my opinion, you cannot act out if in fact you were prayed up in that way. And when you feel like your control is being taken away, then you're going to react to things. So then I encourage us to look at the word fear as face everything and rise. And that's what we're doing today. And how then do we do that? And so when we are it's me taking a class on understanding what does Black Lives Matter to me, a white-faced Irish girl. What does it mean to understand different kinds of levels of the caste system that lives even today in our world? And I did wonder, wow, how angry are they, and how big is that mentality, that mob mentality, that they are going to follow each other in to do the destructive things. I'm with Deacon John about, yes, everybody, and Sister Pam, let us protest and let our voices be heard, and then are we mindful of what our actions are?
I think Rabbi and Reverend Lee and Deacon John, I think I kind of reacted in 3 steps. One was, I had flipped on the television as I was eating a late lunch in between Zoom events and was appalled. I was horrified. And so my first reaction was, this can't be happening. The second one was kind of a flash of memory. And what I remembered was living in Pennsylvania, living in Pittsburgh, teaching at Duquesne University, when the first President Bush was defeated by President Clinton. And we had students at our university from every state in the Union and from 100 nations. That was widely advertised. And I remember that when George H.W. Bush was shaking hands with Bill Clinton, and when they sat together on the stage for the inauguration, that students said to me, we don't understand. This would not happen in our country. There would be people in the streets. There would be guns. The peaceful transfer of power. And I simply said to them, that's what we do here. And I felt as though that was ripped away. But the other part was, there was a part of me that wasn't surprised, because I also lived in Michigan and heard a lot of undercurrent about the Michigan militia. And there was a connection of one of those people to the Oklahoma City bombings. We had recently heard about the plot to kidnap the governor of Michigan. And so on that level, I am aware that there are groups that are what we might call domestic terrorists in our country, and that the logical conclusion of some of the hate speech, the demonizing that's been going on actually for decades, is to move certain elements to become mobs, and mob psychology says you kind of reduce to the level of the least rational member. And then, of course, I thought, my religious tradition says to me, the Sermon on the Mount, which includes what we call the 8 Beatitudes, including, blessed are the meek, they shall inherit the earth. It's Jesus speaking right out of Psalm 37. Blessed are the peacemakers, they shall be called children of God. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And saying, this is a denial of what's very basic to my religious faith.
I want to move to a different dimension. How how many people were in attendance that day? There was, could it be 8 to 10,000 people?
Yes.
Now, I want to challenge Deacon John. I want to challenge all three of you to a question. It's one thing to say that how many people, 500 people maybe actually participated in the attack on our nation's most sacred tabernacle. But the other 5, 6, 7,000 that did not, yet who participated in the protest, who were part of the event from the beginning, my question is, do they share some, in the aftermath of all of this, moral responsibility for what they participated in? I'm not talking about criminal responsibility, but moral responsibility that they participated in an event that went south, morally, legally, and do you think that those people have some culpability for their presence there that day that led to that? I think that it's a fair question, and there may be differences of opinion. Are there? Would you like to, any of you?
I'll go first.
Okay.
I think it's all right to have a divine discontent, to be outraged, to even be frustrated and like, oh, what am I supposed to do? I'm in Bluffton, South Carolina, knowing that I had people that I knew there, and oh my gosh, what's happening? And politics aside, it doesn't matter. And yet, if I'm seeing only the brother in my brother and my brother in my sister, then I have to go back to the words of scripture, of other leaders, like, wow, there is something. So I think it's all right to go, Rabbi, and be there and protest. I've protested a lot. I wear signs and, just because I do. And it's all right to have this discontent within. And then I think it's normal and healthy to go out. And that's why America's so great, because we can hear, we get to have that right of speech. And yet then what I hope is everybody is channeling it creatively into how it is that they want their voices to be heard. So I think all voices get to be heard, and yet not everybody gets their way. And that's what we saw that day on the 6th, and other people decided, you know what, I'm going to take it one step further.
I'm going to ask you to follow. I'm going to follow up with one thing. I'm going to see if I can push you a little bit further. You've said that it's okay to participate, but when you end up participating in something that's so horrible, even if you didn't do the illegal act, don't you share some responsibility at the end of the day? This isn't about whether you have the right to participate. This is about what you ended up being part of. How would you respond to that?
Well, I've been challenged by my congregation when I've been in situations where I've decided to go and participate. And they'll come to me and say, how could you be there? They were talking about this and they were talking about that. I go, as Therese, not even as a minister, as a prayerful presence. When I'm going as a minister, wearing my stole, then I'm going as a prayerful presence as well, in a different capacity, where I might actually be holding peace with my hands and things. So I don't believe that everybody there was in a place of adding to it, because I know when I go, I'm going as a shepherd of peace.
Deacon John, from a police perspective, I'm not sure I can agree with you that the people who did not commit illegal acts, don't bear some moral responsibility because they saw what they saw in the beginning of this process, the remarks from speakers, including the president. I'm not sure I can go as far as you in exonerating those who were peacefully protesting. I'm not accusing them of being, violent or anything. They weren't. But I just happen to think that those folks need to sit down and think about what they participated in, how terrible it turned out. And I think that it's not unfair to say there is a justification for some real reflection about what they did. And I would even go so far as to say repentance. Because what they participated in without their hands, or with their hands in terms of breaking stuff, was a terrible event. Where did they think they were going? What did they think after they heard all those things that they heard? I mean, I don't think they were stupid, not 8,000 people. So I'm just wondering if those people, you know, I'd like to hear your reaction to, really, can we really just exonerate those other 8,000 people? Not legally. We're not talking about that from a police perspective, but from a moral perspective. Don't they share? And I'm going to ask that of Sister Pam to respond to that in a second too. Deacon, you want to take it on? Because you think with two brains. You have 30 years of experience as a detective, and you're also a deacon. How would you respond to my comment? Would you disagree? Whatever you want. What do you think?
Maybe I don't have as much perspective, so I only had 20 years, not 30, but again, and I understand where you're coming from, but I also don't like the idea of painting with one brush. I've seen it throughout my time in the police department and my time as a minister and my time as anything else. When you start painting everyone with the same brush, don't give them an opportunity to be the individual that they are. You probably believe this, that many of the police officers, many of the law enforcement people, many of the people in Congress, okay, believed and listened to the rhetoric that was coming out of the park, and probably had some feelings about, they agreed with some of it, right or wrong. So that means we have to blame them too. But you know what? They tried to do their job. The people that started, there were probably demonstrations throughout the United States at that time, if I read correctly afterwards, right? They were peaceful, never ended in any type of violence. If we would take that view and look at it, that every demonstration that possibly turns violent, we're blaming those people, we would never have a demonstration. Because there's always people come with their own agenda.
Yes.
We saw that throughout the riots and the looting. Most of the people that were in the protests were good, upstanding citizens. And they came with an idea of protesting. But then that small number agenda ruined it for everyone. And people on both sides of the spectrum started to blame those protests throughout the United States. Look what those people are doing. Look at those. They are not us. And that's what we are doing with the people in January 6th. The people that left peacefully should not be lumped in with anyone that did anything illegal.
Thank you. Sister Pam.
Okay, one of the things in Catholic moral teaching is a sense that conscience is one's inner sanctuary where one meets God in truth and in love. I think that some of the people who came in good conscience because they believed that their rights had been overturned and hijacked. I also think that some of those who came had a mistaken sense that somehow the Vice President of the United States could do something that was patently illegal, that he could, change what the Electoral College was going to do. I think one of the problems that we have is that it has become increasingly difficult with the multimedia that we have to really get at what is the truth of this situation and who are the reliable sources. So if I am getting my news from my friends on Facebook, or I'm getting my news from this station as opposed to that station, I am going to find spin. And I do think that there were people who went there in sincerity, thinking that the election was hijacked and that somehow their presence there was going to influence people to do something different, to change it, when they had no capacity to do that. And at the same time, I don't think that a mass of people went there planning to storm the Capitol and hang the vice president and seize things from people's offices and become essentially a lynch mob. I don't think that. And in that sense, I think one has to say the only being who can judge what was in the sincerity of people's hearts is God. And that I find it very hard to believe that all bear some moral culpability. I do think there's moral responsibility to reflect after the fact and say, what was I thinking? What did I think I was going to do there? When going forward, if I knew what I know now, would I have even participated to begin with?
Thank you. I want to ask a question. Audio, I'm hoping that everyone is able to hear. I had one or two people say that they can't hear so well. Are we able, and I'm looking at these, audio quality may be better, may not. Someone said I'm having difficulty with the sound, understanding all the words of the speakers. Is there anything that we need to do, Garrett, that can help us? And if there are, just let me know. If there are other people having trouble with hearing, besides their own issues of hearing, but I'm talking about with this technology, chat line it to us, text us. All the questions I'm going to ask, that you're going to ask, are going to be hopefully written in the chat lines. So I think that that'll give me a chance to move quickly through your questions. So let's have a question or two. Joel asks the question, how do I get back? Because now the chat line, it's a question about Moses. Does Moses, from a tactical perspective, okay? I love that word. From a tactical perspective, Deacon John, is Moses culpable too? And from a religious perspective, you're a clergy, but I'm talking to the NYPD in you. And then I'm going to ask Reverend Lee and Sister, does Moses, does he get a pass because he was communing with God, we think, or was he an absentee parent? And when the priests are gone, then the church falls apart. Is it your fault, Father, that you went on sabbatical and the place went to nothing? Does Moses deserve some of the responsibility and culpability here from a leadership perspective too, Deacon John?
I think you're likening it to righteous anger. Righteous anger. I think Moses had righteous anger. It's just like some Jewish person I know by the name of Jesus. Right? He had righteous anger in the temple when people were using it as a marketplace instead of a place of worship. It's righteous anger. So does Moses have culpability? No, maybe just a lot of glue to put this stuff back together.
Reverend Therese.
Yes, ditto what Deacon John says. And I think he also, for me, we get to be extreme, yes, we can be an extremist in whatever it is we do, but we get to choose. Are we going to be extreme in hate or extreme in love? And he gets to decide, we get to decide always. And everybody, and this is how we look at the Bible at Unity when we metaphysically look at it. I have Moses in me. I have Aaron in me. I have the calf in me. How is it that I have my right relationship with God to have it so that I know what to do, when to do it? That means I meditate and I pray. So it's more about looking at Moses and how am I Moses and how do I show up as Moses and when do I show up as Aaron?
Okay. Let me move on. As you're all part of the Christian faith tradition, and as Christians, when you saw the video after the fact, Reverend Therese, or when it was happening, as Christians, when you witnessed protesters praying before their march and invoking Jesus, since we talked about Jesus, as a source of inspiration to their cause, which would lead them to ransack the Capitol, How do you react in the aftermath of that?
I think they're making stuff up. Jesus is a way shower. No one can make us do anything. Reverend Pam, Sister Pam talked about our consciousness. So are you in right relationship to God when you're praying? What are you praying for? How are you praying? What is your intention? If the great I am in us means intention and attention is going to manifest something. So for me, when I see things like that outside of me, I think people hide behind Jesus. We talked the other day, I'm not a sheeple, and so I am going to see what it is. How did Jesus live his life? Did he curse? Yes. Do I curse? Yes. From the pulpit? No. And I have to take my time to get prayed up, to not hide behind anything. And everybody prays in different ways. All right. I apologize. I guess my mic was off there for a moment. So we don't get to hide behind Scripture. We don't get to hide behind the cross. We don't get to hide behind, because the cross for me means crossing out error thinking, cross out anything that's less than God in our mind. And I believe that day it was a sign, an outward sign of, look at me, I'm praying, right? And look at me, I'm holding its Jesus saves signs, and look at me, I'm holding a cross. Well, why do you hide behind those things? If you are being Spirit-led, then go do your work. But don't use those things to stand behind. So I go within, I get prayed up, I ask what is the will of God to do. And again, I think that whole day was based on fear, lack of control, and not the conscious mind within us that is of right relation to God.
Any other comments? Anybody else want to respond? Go ahead.
Yes, Christians have done some terrible things in history. Crusades,
Yep.
persecution of Jewish people, the Inquisition. There have been things that they've done in the name of Jesus, and they have persecuted members of the church that later became canonized as saints. So that's been a part of the history of this body of people who are saints and sinners. When I see God, gun, and guts, when I see somebody carrying a cross saying, and a sign that says Jesus saves, side by side with swastikas and Confederate war flags, I think that's blasphemy. Mm-hmm. I think that's blasphemy.
So let me follow up with a question, and that is, if there's any questions now, I'm willing to take on questions. I think our Zoom people, I'm just trying to figure out the technology part of this. If you can do write the questions in the chat lines, it's just easier, but I'm willing to try if you unmute yourself. Since we have a lot of people, I don't have a screen of all the people. I can only see 3, 6, 9, so it would probably be better. Okay, so here's a question. I don't know if that's from Robert. What responsibility does President Trump have for what happened after, I'm trying to read this, after his speaking to the crowd? I'm going to ask that really brief answers. If you could, comment. This is from Robert. Do I need to pick on you, Sister Pam? You want to go first?
Well, one of the things that's always been my policy is to address principles, LES at the end, and not political figures. But I think, having used the George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton analogy, I think the appropriate presidential action would have been to go quietly.
Reverend?
I don't get into the politics of it either, and we talked the other day, when I work with, I have 8 grandbabies, and I try to address their behavior versus condemning them as people, not how I was necessarily always brought up, and so I think a statement that you have destructed what you called our sanctuary as a capital would have been a great statement coming from the president's office.
Deacon John, you have something to add to this?
Probably, I didn't hear what his whole speech was about, but I gathered the most important thing was, as the crowd started to turn violent, then he should have said something. And it should have been broadcast throughout. That, I think, if you want to look for some blame, that's where I would put the blame.
Fine. So let me ask you this as a follow-up to the three of you. Is America in trouble? As we understand the fabric of our democracy and the importance of that. We have seen protests, as you said, Deacon John, from the Boston Tea Party to the KKK of 25,000 strong walking down in military formation in 1922, to the Vietnam War veteran protests and burning draft cards at Columbia University, which you were probably there.
Yes.
I think I saw you in one picture.
You probably did.
To the war in Iraq. We've seen this country has been full of protests. I guess my question is, I've never seen anything like this before in terms of ransacking the Capitol and going after people who are elected officials. So even though that was the past and all these other events, now we're in the current. Is this something different? And does this protest belong just to a line of protests that we've seen that will survive, it will move on, we'll learn from it or not? How much credence of seriousness do you put in the events that we saw? And the last thing I want to ask before you answer the question, for the Jewish people who do not know Christianity, wasn't January 6th a special holy day in the Christian world?
Yes.
Yes.
And could you please briefly educate us who are Jewish and may not know what that day was and why that impacted people's reactions to? Can someone do that? And which one of you wants to take it?
Epiphany?
I don't know, whichever.
Okay, I got pointed at. We actually celebrated it the Sunday before at our church, but January 6th, the 12th day of Christmas, has been understood as the day on which we celebrate the feast called the Epiphany, the visit of the wise men from the east to greet the newborn king and to visit the infant Jesus. And the symbolism of it is that Jesus is born among the Jewish people, among the chosen people, but that his life has impact for the whole world, for the Gentile world as well. So that's the feast that's celebrated that day. So it is a very significant day for the Christian tradition.
Thank you. Is America in trouble?
I don't think it's going to stop until we decide this. When you give an inch, some people want to take a yard. When you give a yard, they'll take a mile. We've been, for the last year or so, we've been giving too many inches away. And people are now deciding that, you know what, those people got away with this, I can get away with this. Let's see how far we can push the envelope. And I think January 6th was bad in the sense that, sure, it was the seat of our government, the United States. But what about the seat of government in Portland, in Seattle, Rochester, New York City, so forth and so on? They were attacked too. Maybe not directly on that building, but directly on the way the rule of law in the United States is used. And we kept backing up, and people were taking more and more advantage. If we do not stop it, it's going to get worse. But sooner or later, someone in authority, and I'm not talking law enforcement, I'm talking in our political agenda, is going to have to take a stand and say, no more. I don't care what color you are, what gender you are, what religion you are not going to break the law and be released and get away with this, to do it again and again and again.
Reverend, is America in trouble?
I think as individuals, collectively, I'm going to bring it back to the root of each of us. Where are you in your relationship with God? And one of the things, Rabbi, that you asked was what would be a source of comfort for that day, for all of us right now? And so I chose Ecclesiastes. And so if you look at everything has a season and a time and a reason. And so right now, I believe, because of COVID and what happened on the 6th, this is the big wake-up call, y'all. Get yourself into a relationship with something that is bigger than yourself. Let go the ego, figure out what is yours to do, and embrace ourselves. And that's what I am so grateful for my colleagues here. We're embracing. We don't all believe the same thing, but we all know that God is source. And so how is it that we're going to protect that as our freedom and not to be used against us? And a time to love and a time to hate. So there's going to be a balance of this divine discontent. And how are you dealing with it inside? I like to, go from the back and unpack it and see, so what caused that day? And I do agree, if we don't address the behaviors, unaddressed behaviors causes further worse actions. So I'm all about addressing those.
Excuse me, I just want to make sure I was clear, and I agree with Reverend. We're not talking about legal demonstrations. I was talking about where people are pushing the envelope and becoming violent.
Right.
If we do not stop the violence, it's going to get worse. Hopefully, January 6th is the end of it, violence-wise. But if we don't address it in the future, it's going to get worse.
Yes.
I think we're in trouble on a deeper level even than the rule of law and the move toward violence. It seems to me that since certainly the 1960s and the late 60s, we've had difficulty with just the idea of respect for human beings. There has been this increasing tendency, I used the word before, but to demonize the other or to name people as the enemy without looking at them as individual beings with whom we might have some dialogue if we're willing to take down those barriers. But we've also had a strain in our culture of disrespect for authority and disrespect for the rule of law. And I think part of that is related to the golden calves that we have created. We've made a golden calf of the so-called American way of life, whatever that means, and it obviously means something different to some people than what it might mean to me. And we've made a golden calf of our own circle of the culture without sometimes being willing to step beyond. And I think that whole thing about, kind of the deterioration of our respect for the life of others is reflected in everything from disrespect for the unborn to people of other religious traditions to people who belong to a race that's not the one I belong to, refugees at the border. I mean, it goes all the way across. And it's that, the other as the enemy. And that is of deep concern to me because we have historically prided ourselves as being the melting pot, the welcoming of the stranger, and so on. So I think we are in trouble. I think it's a core value issue.
Do you think that congregations that threaten clergy with their jobs, if they speak to the moral issues, are themselves morally compromised?
For me, what I understand is that my 501c3 is compromised if we're going to be, so I don't talk about voting and I don't talk about Democrat, Republican or anything like that. What I talk about are human rights. So I don't feel like I'm compromised because I have enough outlets to express what it is that I'm doing, but I think if we can get back to hearing God versus fearing God, and that's what I will say to them. I'm not going to make anybody outside of me God. And that's what I saw, that's what the story talks about, right? In Exodus, it also talks about, I think that's what happened that day on the 6th, that you gave your power to somebody else. When you do that, you compromise your own decisions, and then you throw in the monkey mind and the mob mentality, and you're going, all your circuits are going to go crazy. So get back to what is important and know your truth and know when you need to, if I feel compromised, I'm going to walk away.
I think it's important to say that the article that I wrote was all about clergy speaking out. And when congregational boards, and I'm grateful that mine have really been very, very supportive over the years, but when there are congregations that hold the sword of Damocles over somebody's career, not speaking partisan, but speaking on moral issues themselves. Because, when people say don't go politics, that's just a cover-up term to say don't speak about something I don't agree with.
Mm-hmm.
That's all that is. And anyone who doesn't admit to that is lying to themselves.
Correct.
So, do the prophetic conscience, what happened to Jeremiah, Isaiah? Do they not belong in this discussion? Are we prepared to make toast of them and say they're irrelevant because it's cancel culture? I'm just wondering, where is the balance that obviously clergy need to make when they're preaching both from a pastoral level, but also being a moral conscience to the congregation? I just don't know where that balance is for every clergy, but I do know that part of my intention by sharing quotes from different clergy, from Catholic priests to all the rest, was to prove a point that there are clergy that are speaking out here, and I don't know if they're losing their jobs, but they're willing to speak out. I just think that any congregation that would have the chutzpah, do we know that word? New Yorkers all know that word.
That's right, not a doubt.
Okay? Any
Chicago,
congregation that would have the chutzpah and the gall, how about that? To do that to a clergy person, I'm not sure that clergy person, that they deserve that clergy person who has a sincere and is articulate. I think it says a lot about the leadership and about the business side of it, rather than the educational side of what clergy are supposed to do. It's a moral failing, in my opinion. That's my own opinion about it. We all have to use good judgment. The only thing about the 501c3 has only to deal with one issue, and that's really about advocating what political party or it has nothing to do with politics in terms of commenting on the moral issues of the day. It's about an election. That's what they were trying to do with President Johnson with all of that, is to try and get clergy out of advocating for a party or a particular candidate from the pulpit.
Correct.
The rest of it is, the clergy have every right, in my opinion, but the congregational leaderships should be supporting that and not failing morally their clergy or their own community. That's my opinion of it. What about you? What does a clergy do when they're intimidated by their leadership? I don't know how that works. Could it be the bishop in a Catholic sense?
Yeah, and for us it works a little bit differently because essentially the Pope appoints bishops. When they're looking at bishops, they do survey individuals periodically. It's done very secretly about who might make a good bishop, and you could pick out anybody from anywhere in the country that you think might make a good bishop. But we don't appoint bishops, and then we don't appoint our pastors. So the whole thing is, though, that, I'll give you an example. Okay, I work for the bishop in Charleston, and I write a column for the Catholic newspaper that is published under the umbrella of the bishop's authority. So my last column was about why we need to be opposed to capital punishment as Catholics, why in the Catholic tradition opposition to capital punishment. I alluded to the electric chair, obviously an issue before the state legislature, and I figured I might get in trouble. Well, now, basically, the bishop's going to back me up because I'm simply stating what's part of Catholic social teaching and the Catechism of the Catholic Church. So I'm going to get backup from there, but I can catch a lot of flack from fellow Catholics who don't agree with that, and that wouldn't surprise me. I didn't get a lot of flack, which to me says I think a lot of people didn't read it, but in any case, I think, we stand on it could be an item on a platform of a particular party, but when we speak about it, we speak about the issue. And I think there's an obligation to address these issues, to say this is right, this is wrong. There's a whole body of tradition which tells us why it's right or why it's wrong.
Thank you.
Right before the election, the Bishop's Council came out with the platforms. And people asked me, as an individual, not as a clergy, who are you thinking about voting for? I said, I'm looking at the platform. And I think, as Sister alluded to, that's more important to us because we're going to disagree or agree with every individual that's in politics. There's no doubt, just like every priest, bishop, reverend, whatever it might be, rabbi. But what are the issues that they are standing for? And I think that's what we need to do. And I technically work with the bishop, but he puts me in a parish, and I have to report to that pastor. And in our place, what we do and what we're told to do, and alluded to, we don't take sides. We look at an issue, and that's what we're looking to do. Speak about the issue, and how does it reflect our Catholic Christian being? That's what we need to do. And I think we need to do more and more of that. I'm my personal opinion. I think we all should be able to express the Catholic Christian views from our pulpit when we have the opportunity, as I'm doing right here. I came here not as a New York City police officer. I came here as a deacon who had a background there. So most people are going to see it and they're going to say, well, he's expressing his views as a deacon. Yes, I am. In a sense, because I'm looking at it from the Catholic Christian perspective. I think that's what we need to do.
In Unity, we all work for God. There's nobody who tells me what to say or do. I'm ordained, and we have an ordinating body. And I'm pretty bold as a middle child of 11. And I don't want to get distracted by what my job is. And I believe my job is to be the expression of love. And sometimes that looks like I'm marching. Sometimes it means I'm sitting in a pew or at a hospital bed praying. And so no one is ever funneling my words, telling me what to do. And I don't think I'm bliss-ninny. I think that I have to look at people and maybe this is just where I come from. I'm named after St. Therese, the little flower of Jesus. And her whole vocation was love. And can you see love in somebody? And so when I see these people acting out, it could even be the person who's rude in front of me at the store. I have to go to, oh my gosh, what's going on with them? It doesn't mean I would say, excuse me, don't hit me with your cart. However, I'm going to then step back and not react to that. And so it's an interesting place in a family. My family is Catholic, and I'm very different than they are with that because I don't want to be distracted from my presence here is supposed to be of prayer and of peace and of love, and to hold steadfast to that, and to look at my board or my congregants, and we are politically diverse, to say, I speak for what I believe in, and I will not talk about other people like Pam said, and we are going to figure out what is it. And the question I ask, Rabbi, is instead of what now, how about now what? What are we doing now to go forward? And I don't blame. I just look at people and say, wow, So my family that went there they were there on the 6th, some of my extended Lee family. And I haven't had a talk with them yet about that. They live down in Florida. But what is it, and why did you go, and what was your perception? Because I don't know. I don't know that answer. I would have gone in a minute if I was going to, if there was time, and all the things that I want to do to be the prayerful expression of that. And the moment that my board or anybody tries to censor me, as people in my past life have known, whether it was publishing or where in sales, is then I just realize my time is done there. And other congregations that I've left, God says, move on, sister. Go ahead and do whatever else you're supposed to do.
Do you want to, those of you who are on Zoom, maybe this is a good time for you to open up and unmute yourselves, at least to ask the question, since they can hear you. Would you like to do that? So we can try and do it one at a time, see how it works. So would you like to do that? Make a comment, ask a question, just unmute yourself and go for it. I mean, I can't believe Jewish people are like quiet. This is not normal. Something they must have taken something this morning. Would someone like to ask a question or make a comment to our colleagues or myself? Yes, Penny.
Good morning. Thank you for this. It's been fabulous and very insightful. I just want to say one thing, and it's really not a question. In Judaism, in congregational life, the congregation hires the rabbi and can terminate a rabbi also. So I think rabbis at times have to walk a little bit finer line about certain things. That's it.
As compared to Christianity, which is the bishop.
Right,
I mean,
that's
Catholicism.
Just
Yes,
Catholic,
thank
yeah,
you.
because I'm,
The other churches, elect and appoint our ministers.
Right.
yeah, I was interviewed as well. Yeah, there's no one
Yes,
appointing in
yes.
unity.
Joel Green.
This is a question that's somewhat semi-political, I guess, but in order to move forward, I think as a nation, I look at Congress and they seem to have abrogated their responsibilities in many ways, oftentimes putting political party against, before the nation, before the interest of the nation. Perhaps, and I was wondering what you think, is it time to start maybe the first step by enacting some sort of term limits on members of Congress? Would that help us get back on track where we should be?
Anybody got an opinion? Anyone have an opinion on that?
I would just say in my lifetime, it has seemed to me, since I first voted, that we witnessed people much more willing to work across the aisle and to work toward reasonable compromises. The politicization of many questions seems to have kind of usurped the dedication to the common good. And I guess I would be one of those people who would say, I think term limits might be a good idea.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I agree. I think it's time. I think it's been time for a long time that we should have term limitations because, as one person once told me, as soon as a person gets elected to office, the next day they start running for re-election. And I think it's more important that they're willing to serve the people and not worried about the job.
Let them get real jobs.
Yeah.
I understand.
And same with me. I think it's, I have a term limit on my contract and stay mindful and are you still on purpose and have those crucial conversations with each other.
Well, we all have our term limited as mortal beings. So, the great countdown, as they say. There's other comments and questions that you may have. Please feel free to do so. Anybody want to, otherwise we'll move on. Okay, I'm not hearing any other questions or comments. Okay, let me move on. You are, there's 8,000 people You know it's a protest rally. You know that this is going to be some serious, stuff, but you don't know what. You show up, just like your family in Florida. You have the passion. You know you're going to go down Pennsylvania Avenue. You follow the president who says that he's going to go with you, and you are all set to go. And they say, we want you to teach us, do a teach-in in front of 8,000 people, and you have to choose a text that you're going to use in front of 8,000 people. And what would be the sacred scripture in front of 8,000 people that you would have used had you been given the opportunity to speak before this group? They are prepared for the answer to this question.
I'll jump in. First of all, you're looking at a diverse group, so we don't know which God or which denomination, or if they follow any God.
Absolutely.
Okay. I probably would liken it to, I was talking to Sister before, one of the courses I taught in college was world religions. And you have different aspects. But one thing always seemed that was at the bottom line, the golden rule. Do unto others as you want done unto you. And then my second question would be is, what God teaches violence? And I don't know if I could probably cite scripture on it. I did cite a little earlier in today's presentation. If I was doing it, if it was a Christian audience, I would say, he said, listen to him. If we have to listen to Jesus, we can't find him violent. We can't find him doing things to hurt other people. So that's probably where I would come from.
Sister Pam?
Yeah, I cited the Sermon on the Mount, blessed are the meek, and blessed are the peacemakers, and blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. But in many ways, aside from quoting Psalm 37, I think it's commentary on Micah 6, verse 8. He has told you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God.
Yeah, which means you have to know your God, right? Have a relationship. So if it was all Christians per se, and I really think I'm part Buddhist as well, but anyway, I would talk about Romans 12:2, to be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so you can discern the will of God, which means it's not Therese deciding, it's what is it when I get myself centered in my Christ consciousness, which everybody has, it has nothing to do with Jesus. It's coming from the highest level of consciousness, which is love. And if I was taught, and then in general to anybody, what I quoted before was the Ecclesiastes, which is verses 1-8. It's everything has a season. So was God there on the 6th of January? Yes. Everywhere present, everywhere always, and in all ways. Did God cause what happened? Absolutely not. So this has happened. So now what are we going to do about it, and what will we do together in our consciousness where we feel this divine discontent of what is right and what is wrong, and maybe let go the boxes of naming right and wrong, and no, it's just not serving us to be violent. So how will we go forward together?
If someone wanted the sites that I was using, it was Mark 9 and Matthew 17. It's called the Transfiguration. And it goes back to actually our Jewish roots, because Jesus is present in his divine state at that time. And who's on his right but Moses, the lawgiver, who's on his left, Elijah, one of the greatest prophets. And he brings together everything at that time to state, if you truly trust and believe in God, these are the things you won't do. They would know, as Reverend pointed out, God was present, but he was present and they weren't listening.
What would you do, Rabbi? Well, rabbis, we always like to tell stories too. And I would quote a brief story from the Talmud. A person who wants to be a convert goes to Shammai, who was one of the earliest sages in the first century of the Common Era, and says, "Can you convert me to Judaism, Rabbi, while standing on one foot?" Shammai looks at him and says, this is directly from the Talmud, "Get out of here." Then he goes to Rabbi Hillel, "Can you convert me to Judaism while standing on one foot?" Hillel looks at him, instead of sending him away like he's an idiot, Hillel says, "Whatever is hateful to you, do not do to another. All the rest is commentary. Now go learn it."
Yes.
And I think that picks up a lot of what you said. Listen, learn, listening and learning. I think that those are all messages that the clergy need to be saying now. And I hope they are. I don't know about the clergy who support these kinds of things, who are on the completely different ideological side than I am. And I don't think there's anything called neutrality. You cannot be neutral. There's no neutrality here. If you're neutral, you're irrelevant, in my opinion. But you can find a balance between, like Deacon says, justice, which can never mean just us, right? Justice has to mean applied, equally. And there's also peace. You can't. Left wing says no justice, no peace. The right wing says justice applied equally to the. Go after the left wing as much as you want to go after the bad boys and girls on the right wing. Fair enough. We should be going after those people who went after the Portland Federal Courthouse. We should be stopping people on all sides for the destruction of property. You can't stop them. I don't know if legislation is the answer. Term limits. I went through term limits when I was rabbi in Sacramento. I don't think it has made any difference in terms of making California a more moral or less moral society. I think it has nothing to do with it. Can it make public officials? I don't know. The only reason why they made term limits in California, which is like any nation, was to get rid of Willie Brown. That was the only reason that they made term limits. As a result of that, all you end up doing is strengthening the bureaucracy and the lobbyists when you have limits to how many years a representative or state senator. So if you want to strengthen the bureaucracy, go ahead.
I have an analogy.
Go ahead.
So we talked about the left wing and the right wing. And when I teach spiritual intelligence, which has nothing to do with theology, what I talk about, if love is the bird, with one wing being compassion and the other wing being wisdom. Imagine. What would fly if that was every bird, if every thought we had out there? Just saying. We're getting to the end here. One thing I just want to mention to my Christian colleagues that bothered a lot of Jewish people. Because, look, Christianity is the dominant religion of America. There's nothing even to discuss about that. Whether you call it Unity Church, Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or you want to go to the Catholics. It's so pluralistic, Christianity. It's unbelievable in America, right? Got that. It's beautiful, beautiful. I know a lot of Jewish people, when they were watching the video of the events of January 6th, saw some nasty stuff that related to clear-cut anti-Semitism, like people wearing shirts, Camp Auschwitz. Yes.
And I think that maybe I'd like to ask you to comment, because, Catholics have had their fair share of being oppressed by American Protestants in the course of American history. No question about that. The history, is there. Now there's 50 million Catholics. There are 6 million Jews. There are basically 6 million Muslims, let alone the Sikhs and the Hindus and Lord knows Baha'i and name them, name your religion. I would love to hear a message, I don't know, maybe some words from you about some legitimate fear that what not just Jews, but other religious minorities sense from what we saw. How do you deal with talking about fear that leads you to commit acts of violence? But what about fear when you're the one that says, these people are going to hate me? This is a new, they hate. Whatever the fear of what America, that they fear and something about America, fact is that the outward behavior is hatred. How do you respond to Jews who are saying, images capture everything, praying to the cross, and a group that says, welcome to Camp Auschwitz? It's unsettling. And to the human mind, it becomes one tapestry of a moment that's captured in the media. I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts about how Jews should see this.
I think, to me, one of the scariest things is encountering the fact that we have neo-Nazis and that we have Holocaust deniers. I have met in my career one Holocaust denier who was a crazy student and went into battle with him about how can you deny the reality of the Holocaust, but I know he wasn't convinced. This goes back into the 1980s. And I think we have to admit that Christianity and Catholicism in many ways reinforced anti-Semitism. I mean, the Warsaw Ghetto in Catholic Poland and so on. But that we have really taken a huge turn in terms of understanding the reality of people's faiths and the respect that we owe to people's faiths. When I was a kid, we were still using language like heretics, dissidents, and schismatics, and pagans, and it was kind of like this wide way of describing people who were not Catholic. And then we had the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s, and we had cardinals from all over the world and consultants from all over the world who said, we are seeing a different reality, and actually having a country like America where there's freedom of religion, where we have encountered people of other faith traditions, we have to see differently. So we started talking about Protestant Christians and Orthodox Christians as our separated brothers and sisters. Then we also put out a document about non-Christian religions, which said right at the outset, we reject nothing that is holy and true in these religions. And the first section was about our affinities and our roots with Judaism. And again, that's one of those things that I'm not sure how much it's been internalized by Catholics. I know I've certainly taught those documents, but I think, and I've introduced them in Catholic high schools, as well as colleges and seminaries. But I think we have to say that this whole sense of being one human race is so vital. But I think our culture, with its demonizing of people, with its making enemies of people that are other, has really set us back. And then on top of it, the whole thing with the Holocaust is trying to help people not forget that this is what happened. Right. And that this is what people who say they believe in God can get sucked into when they're not paying attention. And when suddenly somebody mobilizes them in hatred. That's very scary. Very scary.
Yeah.
And I lived near Squirrel Hill when I lived in Pittsburgh, where the synagogue was invaded and people killed. That's very scary.
Okay, any other comment before we close it up?
I would like to say that I think the Bible is used as a weapon. And so, the Bible says this. Does it? Does it? Really? Okay. And it's the Word of God. Okay, all right. But we know men wrote it, right? And so this fear of losing, And this is, and it's the caste system that is, there's a great book that I'm studying right now, and it's by Wilkerson, Isabel Wilkerson wrote it, and it's, if we are fearful of what we're going to lose, and then, oh my gosh, someone's going to be better than me, and, we have to stop that, and that's all about educating. This today, you guys, we are educating people on what it looks like to have different opinions and still be respectful of each other. And I think in general, it's about a fear of losing control of what has been in control, and that is being dismantled. And we are part of I'm part of the dismantling team.
Just one quick comment. I agree with everything that's said, and I do believe what happens, and you use the word media. The media showed the shirt. That the media show the millions of other Christians and other denominations who support Jews and people of other religions. Do we show that, for every person who is anti-religion, how many millions are pro-religion? I think that's what we need to focus on too, how we support each other. And what you've done today with your congregation, I'm just sorry that it's not in all of our congregations, so that they could see different religions coming together to speak, even if we might disagree on something, but agree to disagree. And I think that's what we need to do more often. We need to have more ecumenical councils. We could do that. And just like with your article, you said you get pros and cons. We'd get pros and cons for what we talked about, but you know what? It would make them stop and think. And I think that's what we're trying to do.
Yes, education.
I want to go over a couple things, and then I have one last question, a logistics side. We are going to have our next Hot Topic Shabbat in April with, the theme will be COVID-19, legal issues, religious liberty. We have Charlie Sanders and Jerry Swimmer, who will be our panelists for Hot Topic Shabbat. They are both accomplished attorneys. One went to the University of Pennsylvania School of Law, and one went to Harvard. I think they're still accredited schools. So anyway, we're going to have them there. And then we have one last one. I haven't decided how we're going to do this, but I think, Deacon John, you'll be interested. The theme for the Torah, remember, it's always about the Torah portion. The leper and COVID-19, that's where I got that. In May, the theme is blasphemy, because that's in the book of Numbers. So I got to think about what the angle is, but you know me, I'll get there. So let me mention that. Let me also note, everybody, there's lots of stuff going on at the temple, but it's just it's not live, it's virtual. But the temple is what it is. It's in people's minds, it's hearts. Show up virtually. Call a congregant. If you haven't talked to somebody who may not have the computer skills, give them a call. Say hello. A lot of people don't have the skills that you do and can turn on a computer and go right to a website. Just please remember to do that. There's one last question of one member of the panel that has been asked me to ask you. Now, there's a lot of people want to know this, and it's for Deacon John. I got this question for everyone. I've been picking on you. I'm having a good time. Deacon John, a lot of people want to ask me this. We just showed is Janice Frodkin still here? There she is, good. So, Deacon John, we just showed a documentary on Monday called Deli Man. And it's all about America's delicatessens. It's a wonderful documentary. We saw it. And since you're a total New Yorker, and we got a bunch of New Yorkers that are watching today from our congregation, and we want to know, in your 30 years of walking the streets of New York, you must have had your favorite New York delicatessen. And now in front of everybody, we want to know, what was your favorite New York delicatessen as you serve the people of New York City as one of New York's finest?
Katz's Deli on Canal Street. Buy a salami for your boy in the army. Open 24 hours a day, and let me tell you, leaving quarter 3
Did you hear that, ladies and gentlemen? Janice Fratkin, did you hear that? So Katz's Deli wins out at the end. Penny, our New Yorkers who are here, Joel, growing up in Brooklyn, all the other New York folks, Deacon John has says, Katz, you can still go there today and do the same thing. Deacon John, I want to thank you. It's great to make your acquaintance. I hope this is the beginning of a new friendship. We thank you very much for being here, so much for trusting that this was going to be an okay experience, and I hope for you it was.
Yes.
I'm glad. Sister Pam, you're a member of this family, and we'd like to think that we're a member of your family. The work you do for your faith and for our community as the Chief Ecumenical Officer of the Diocese of Charleston, which people don't always know. Thank you so much. We're going to continue to work together. We got stuff to do. Reverend Therese Lee, you are how can I say this? You are a tapestry of many interwoven colors.
Thank you.
And I just want you to know it is a delight to have you, and I hope that if your congregants were watching, that they know what everyone else knows, that you've been a wonderful partner over here at the temple. We're looking forward to having all of you back, as well as ourselves back.
I would like to add one thing we did not mention today.
Go ahead.
I think this country it's in grief. We've had so much loss, and then if we don't name the loss, we don't recognize that we're in grief, and then we don't realize, oh my gosh, I'm angry, so now I'm going to act out. So if we even looked at it from that standpoint of a loss of a president, right or wrong, COVID itself. So how much has COVID played into this, what happened on the 6th, based purely on the fact that we are a country that is grieving?
So our job is to take the moral high ground. And figuring out what that high ground is going to vary from person to person.
Yes.
But one thing that I feel that my congregation, I've taught my congregation this, and they have agreed, whatever we say has to be backed up by Scripture. Because if you don't have that, that's what we have. That is our weapon. That is our healing balm. That is it's our prophetic conscience, and it's our pastoral tool, is our sacred texts, whether it be the Christian scriptures, the Hebrew scriptures, the Talmud, the Midrash, whatever it is. We are the repositories of that knowledge. And that is what we use to give us a headlight in a lot of fog these days. I thank you for using your scriptures and your own conscience, and this was a delight. God bless you, members of the community watching and members of my temple. I'll see you soon. Soon. Get your shots. And oh, by the way, I wanted to tell my congregants, so since this is recorded, I'm scheduled to get my second shot, and after the second shot, I will cut my hair. So I'm just letting you know that that's going to happen. But I purposely went to my president and said, I'm not cutting this, because lots of people that I talked to got COVID because they went to get their hair cut and get their nails done. And I just said a year ago, forget it, I'm going to become a hippie again. So, and it's out of, solidarity with those people that have to make sacrifices. And that's why I kept my hair going. And I thank everybody for being polite. And everybody, and my daughter said, cut it. So I just want to give you, I want you to know that a lot of people said, at least you have hair. So we have to have a sense of humor. And then we're leaving on a happy and joyous note.
Yes.
Okay, it's Shabbos.
Yes.
Let's have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deacon John, Sister Pam, Reverend Therese. God bless B'nai Beth Yam, and all of the congregations watching. Shalom. And
Shalom.
Lehitraot. See you
Namaste.
again soon.
Peace.
Peace.